Tuesday, which is after we have covered the second part of the plant stuff, right? So I'll try to post that as soon as possible, though. But in the meantime, just try to take good notes. So yes, all right. What am I doing? Okay, so I'm here. This is where I want to be. You guys can all see my screen, right? You're not staring at me again, right? Okay, so plants, you guys know what plants are. Obviously, plant cells. We talked a little bit about the difference between plant cells and animal cells, right? So what were the main structures that were different about plant cells that from like animal cells, let's say, or like from other types of cells?
Plants have a cell wall and animal cells don't.
Good. And cell wall in plants is made of what?
Peptidoglycan?
Very good.
Cellulose.
Oh, no. Sorry, no. Yeah, peptidoglycan is for bacteria. So cellulose. Good. Sorry, I was. Yeah, cellulose. Good. What else do they have? Chloroplasts, right? Chloroplasts are the ones that contain photosystems, right? So any photosynthetic organisms will have chloroplasts or chlorophyll at least, and that's those are the organs that undergo or that perform photosynthesis and transform sunlight to like organic molecule and store energy in organic molecules. And then the other plant cell feature that they have is like a vacuole, right? Because they need to store water, and the vacuole helps sort of maintain their like tautness, like it helps maintain the osmotic pressure inside the cell so that the plant cell doesn't like either shrivel up and dry out, or so that it doesn't over gather too much water such that the pressure on the cell wall would cause it to burst or something, right? So these are like the specialized organelles that plant cells have, right? So the evolution of plants, right? Plants are a higher order, are more complex than, and usually, first of all, what domain are plants in? Domain.
Eukarya.
Eukarya, right? And what kingdom then? So the level of plantae is a kingdom level, right? So they're eukarya and then plant. Okay, good. And what else contains chloroplasts that we've studied before already? Protists. What kind of protists? Algae, exactly. So plant-like protists, they all contain chloroplasts, so they are able to perform photosynthesis. So where do you guys think that plants might have evolved from? Okay, they actually did evolve from green algae, and people do like analyses of the DNA, like, and how the DNA has changed over, so they can sort of like analyze it and figure out that a series of mutations somehow led to the development of plants from green algae, right? So, but they are similar, but green algae is now classified as protists because they don't have, they don't do all the features that plants like that, that, what's the word? Like real plants can do. So that's why they're not exactly classified as plants, but they're similar in some ways, okay? So plant cells, right? Ooh, did I already do this? Why am I going backwards? Oh, there are two cells like that. Two slides like that. That's weird. Okay, so do you guys know why plants are green? And this kind of goes back to our studies of like the spectrophotometer and like light and how light gets absorbed or reflected based on the material. So why would plants be green then? What's going to happen to green light?
It gets reflected.
Reflected, good, exactly. So it gets reflected, and then what other colors are getting absorbed then?
Everything else.
Everything else is getting absorbed, right? Okay, good. So if you guys look at the spectrum, like the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So here, these are the wavelengths, right, in nanometers. So obviously, like, so here's the range of visible light, and then green light is the one that's being reflected back into our eyes, and so all this other light is getting absorbed, right? So if you see a question on that on a test, the answer would be that green light is being reflected, right? Or the green light is not being absorbed. right? Okay. All right. So are they eukaryotic or prokaryotic? We already said that they're eukaryotic, right? Autotrophic or heterotrophic?
Autotrophic.
Autotrophic. Good. And are they unicellular or multicellular for the most part?
Multicellular.
Multicellular. Good. And what level of the ecosystem are they? So when we talked about ecology, we talked about the different levels, right? They were like the initial ones that started the whole. So they're called what?
Primary producers.
Say it one more time.
Primary producers.
Good. Primary producers. Exactly. Good. Okay. Easy so far. Okay. So uses of plants, or like the function of plants, the roles of plants. First of all, in the ecosystem, why are they like crucial in the ecosystem? Like we would not be here without plants, as much as we like might take them for granted. Like plants are super essential because they are the first level that creates all this sugar that can be then used at higher levels of the ecosystem, right? Even if you hate vegetables, you still, everything that you do is all thanks to plants, harnessing this light energy and then making it into this form that we can then use as ourselves in our own cellular respiration, right? So they're primary producers in the ecosystem, right? And the byproduct in that process of creating sugar, you guys might know this, you might not know this, but the byproduct that comes out when water gets split in the first stage of photosynthesis is oxygen, right? So essentially they release the oxygen into the air that we use to then undergo aerobic respiration, right? And they also, in order to make the sugar, they take carbon dioxide out of the air and then convert that into this usable form of glucose, right? So that's kind of major, because if there's too much carbon in the air, then carbon dioxide in the air, that's a greenhouse gas. So it actually attracts sunlight, like heat, right? And then that is a major contributor to global warming. So things like deforestation, where we're killing all these plants, is actually like kind of messing stuff, our own earth up, because then we don't have enough plants to take that heat, that hot, greenhouse gas out of the air. And thus we're collecting more heat here on earth, right? All right. So yeah, they moderate the climate in some areas, right? By providing shade and then providing, like they as opposed to like a desert where there's like very little foliage, plants actually do bring temperatures to more moderate levels. The roots hold soil down, so they can, support huge ecosystems of other types of organisms. So not only, humans rely on them, but everything else in the ecosystem relies on them, because squirrels have like houses in the trees, and then like they hold the soil down so that all these worms and like bugs and like other things can like live in that area, so it doesn't just like fly away as soon as there's like any sort of wind. Plants are helping hold that together, right? Obviously, like food, not only for us but for other organisms, right? Like vegetables, herbs, like pretty much everything. A lot of food comes from plants. And even if we don't eat the plants directly, if we're eating like steak, for example, that steak was fed on something plant-based. So there should be like no real debate about like the importance of plants in terms of food production. What am I doing here? Okay. Fuel. You guys have heard of like, biofuels, right? So essentially like a lot of plants can be used to create fuel to, run, certain like processes to get energy, right? So that's another use of plants. Materials for clothing, right? Obviously, like all our clothes are made of like things like cotton, which is from a plant. Things like wood, right? Like building materials, those are also, they result from plants, which is, wood. Medicine, there are a lot of like medicines that come from plants too, right? Do you guys know, like when you get really, really bad sunburn, what do you put on your skin?
Aloe.
Aloe, exactly. Good. So that's also like plant-based. There are a lot of therapies that are from plants too. So there are a lot of, this is just to establish that plants are good and they have a lot of good uses for us. So we need to kind of respect them, even though, we step on grass and the trees are just sort of there and like not moving and not really doing much. We still need to kind of like just be aware of how important this all is, right? Okay, so this is where the unfun part, if that was fun before, this is like even worse. So classification of plants, there are basically 4 different types of classification of plants, right? Largely. So there's ones that are non-vascular, and these are some examples, and they're called bryophytes. You should know that word just to like recognize it. And the main example that I would want you to know from these are like mosses. Do you guys know what moss looks like?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like just like kind of a low growing, it looks like a carpet almost, right? It's like a really low growing type of plant. And that's like the most like primitive like level of plants, right? Okay, so the next one is vascular, right? And all the next three groups are all considered vascular, right? But the first level of vascular ones are called ferns or seedless plants, right? So those are examples of those are ferns. But they have vascular tissue. And do you guys know what vascular means versus non-vascular? No. So basically vascular means that you have like tubes or like a network of like pipes in the plant that help transport like nutrients and water, right? So this is like, this level is the first level that actually has those like networks. Non-vascular plants, how would they get their water and nutrients then? If they don't have any like sort of tubes or like, sort of pipes or something to help get
Absorb it. Just like absorb it.
Yeah, they just absorb it, right? So that's why they need to probably all live pretty close to the ground or pretty close to whatever they need to absorb, right? And they can't like form these like really tall networks or tall shapes because then the ones at the top wouldn't have access to those materials. So that's why these types of plants are like all pretty low lying and they live in like moist environments so they can just like suck it up from the environment. Whereas these can be a little taller because they have some like, really primitive, but still they have like the early beginnings of like pipes and like, roots and networks and that's called vascular tissue, right? So the first one is seedless vascular. The next classification is like, so these guys have seeds. So they're like called gymnosperms, but they're naked seeds. So the seeds aren't like enclosed in like, they're not like protected, right? They're just kind of like out in the open. So those are called gymnosperms, and examples of those like evergreens, right? Like pines, like things with like those cones, like pine cones have like the seeds kind of exposed, but they're not like encased in like an outer like casing that will protect them, right? And then the next level is encased seeds. So those are examples of those are like those are called angiosperms, and those are like the flowering plants. So the flower and like the fruit kind of protects the seeds from damage or from like degradation or something. So these are the 4 types, right? This is the only non-vascular group, and then seedless. And you see how we're getting a little more advanced each time. So these are non-vascular. These are vascular but have no seeds. They have seeds, but they're naked seeds, and these have like the most protected, most advanced seeds, right? And I'll show you like some pictures and some examples of each one, just so you can kind of visualize it a little easier. So these are examples of non-vascular, right? Not these things up here, but like the moss, right? Do you see all the moss? It has to grow pretty, like it grows on rocks and it's low lying, so it can absorb everything that it needs to. This is just like a close-up version of like what it looks like. And these are some of the reproductive structures that they make. And we'll talk about plant reproduction in a second, which is like kind of complicated. So But so these have no vascular tissue, meaning, again, vascular tissue means like a system of like sort of channels within the plant that would transport materials, right? So these ones can't store water. They can't transport water. They just have to absorb it and use it as they go. Okay? So they live in low and moist environments. Mosses, liverworts, hornworts. Okay? And those are also called bryophytes. All right? Questions so far? No? Okay, so then we have vascular plants. Again, so this is the first level of vascular plants have vascular tissue, but they don't have seeds. So those are the ferns again, right? Vascular, again, it means that you have vascular like tissues, like so cells that create these like sort of channels for they're almost like tubes, right? That carry around nutrients and stuff. So there are two different tubes within vascular plants that carry certain types of materials around the plant. So the first one is called the xylem, and the xylem carries water and other dissolved, like maybe solutes, in only one direction. So it only goes from the bottom up, so from the roots up into the stem and then to the leaves, right? So it's called the xylem. And then the water, what happens to the water once it gets up there? Any idea? So when the water gets up there, it pretty much evaporates through the leaves, right? And that's called transpiration. And then it pulls more water up as each molecule evaporates. It kind of pulls up another water molecule up the xylem. So xylem is water and other dissolved nutrients. Phloem is the other type of vascular channel, vascular tissue, and that one carries. So what do plants make in their leaves? They make
Glucose,
right? And so are the leaves only going to be the part of the plant that uses the glucose? No, right? All cells need glucose, right? So basically the phloem can carry that sugar that's made, and it can carry other materials, like so other like, sort of dissolved, nutrients around the cell, like hormones. So it can carry things in both directions, right? So both from the roots to the shoots, like meaning to the leaves, and then from the leaves to all other directions in the plant. So xylem and phloem, those are the two types of vascular tissue inside plants, right? And again, the first level of plants that get vascular tissues are the seedless vascular plants, or they're also called tracheophytes, and they're the ferns. Ferns are the example of that, okay? But so xylem and phloem. And it gets more complex in like the higher like level plant organisms, right? So here's an example of seedless vascular. Again, it has vascular tissue, but no seeds. So it has xylem and phloem, but again, primitive versions of those. No seeds in these, okay? All right, the next level is, these are the gymnosperms, right? So again, they're evergreens. They have seeds, but the seeds are not encased in like a flower or in a fruit. They are just sort of naked seeds. They do have these structures like pine cones that do disperse the seeds, but they're not considered like protected, right? So gymnosperms, naked seeds, but they're still vascular, so that means they still have a xylem and a phloem, right? Xylem takes the water and nutrients up to the leaves, whereas the phloem gets it from the leaves and sort of takes it all around, like it could take some from here to here or whatever, but the xylem only goes up, right? All right, and then the last one is like, flowering plants. Basically, those are called angiosperms again, right? And they have these beautiful flowers that then protect the seeds inside of them. And these have like very complex vascular tissue, right? Oops. Okay, pretty easy. So that's like the only level of classification that I really want you to know. I want you to know those 4 groups and what the difference is between each of those groups, right? And which ones are vascular and which ones are non-vascular, all right? And maybe some examples. So like, these would be like flowering plants. These are evergreens. These are ferns, and and the first one would be just like moss, right? Okay, so now I want to talk about this weird thing in plants called alternation of generations, and this is their mode of reproduction. So plants' mode of reproduction is like their version of like their sexual reproduction. Okay, and what's kind of weird is that plants can like self-pollinate, so they can like actually like they can produce both types of like both gametes, and then they can kind of fertilize themselves, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, that's like something that they can do, so we should know that. But yeah, so they reproduce sexually. Okay, and don't get intimidated, but this is sort of how the life cycle of this is mainly like a bryophyte, like so like a moss, like a very like primitive plant. But I just want you to like notice certain things in it, right? So we're gonna start with like a 2N. You guys are familiar with like what diploid means, right? So this is a multicellular diploid organism. All right, do you see that? And then so that diploid organism, basically it undergoes meiosis, right? So this is the moss, here's the plant, right? And then those cells there undergo meiosis to form spores, like in this little area right here, right? So this is the sporophyte, that's like the diploid organism. It undergoes meiosis in one part, and then it creates these little spores, which are haploid, right? Because meiosis goes from diploid to haploid. Are you guys all with me so far? Yeah? Okay, and these spores are not gametes. They're just haploid little cells, right? These little kind of pieces of like dust almost, right? So here are little pieces of dust, and then so we created the spores, right? And then those spores sort of like fly somewhere. They get dispersed in the air, and then they end up landing somewhere like on the ground, okay? So let's say one spore lands on the ground, right? And then that spore undergoes mitosis. So if this is if it's an N, it started as N, in mitosis, does the chromosome number get divided or no? In mitosis?
No.
No, right? So basically the spores, even though they're N, they're haploid. Usually we're used to having mitosis be from 2N to 2N, right? But in this case, it's just from N, and then it undergoes mitosis and is still N, right? But that makes sense, right? And then basically that spore forms this whole plant based on that one individual, initial spore. And it becomes like an actual plant. That's like if our eggs or our sperms like just went out and started like dividing like among themselves without undergoing fertilization, and then just made like another little person, but like a haploid person, right? Which is it's really weird to think about, but that's what plants do. So basically they make these little cells. Those cells divide by mitosis and become like an actual organism here, but all the cells in that organism are haploid, right? So, and that's called the gametophyte. So this is a multicellular haploid organism. And that's what's so different between plants and other animals, is that they can have an actual individual, like a living organism that can either be diploid, which is like the sporophyte, or it can be haploid. Okay? And then what happens is that haploid organism, right? Here's the gametophyte. Parts of the plant start differentiating into 2 different types. There's one part it's like a male part, or develops a male organ, which is called the antheridium, right? So let's say like up here, this is like an antheridium, right? And basically what that does is it starts to produce sperm, right? if this is already a haploid organism, how would it produce sperm? By mitosis or meiosis? If it's already haploid, and sperm we know are haploid or diploid?
Haploid?
Haploid. So for this haploid organism, right, to make a sperm, does it need to undergo meiosis to make a sperm? It's already haploid here.
No,
So
mitosis.
So it just goes regular mitosis, right? So the antheridium, let's say that this area is the antheridium, that produces sperm by mitosis, right? And then there's another area that's called the archegonium, and that's the female part, and that produces eggs. And that's like usually, let's say, like it looks more like a sort of like a V-shaped sort of thing. So like, let's say this is like an archegonium, and that produces the eggs, right? So here's an egg, let's say, and that's produced also by mitosis, because this whole thing is haploid. So in order to produce these haploid gametes, you only need to undergo mitosis, right? And then from there, once we have our gametes, then they fertilize, right? And it could fertilize itself again, or they could go fertilize another one, that maybe a nearby plant or like something else. It could, maybe it could be like fertilizing some nearby plant. But in any case, fertilization occurs. So this is when the zygote, the 2N zygote, right? Because we have N, so then they make 2N. And then that zygote, in order to recreate the original sporophyte that made the spores to begin with, we undergo mitosis because we already have 2N from fertilization. So then we undergo mitosis to create this large organism again, that is the sporophyte, right? Are you guys totally lost? Let's watch this video and see if that sort of helps clarify it a little bit, okay? All right.
A moss, like all other plants, undergoes a complex life cycle in which the generations alternate between haploid and diploid forms. The most familiar form of the moss is the leafy haploid form, called the gametophyte. Gametophytes are either male or female. The male gametophyte produces male gametes, sperm, inside reproductive structures called antheridia. The haploid gametophyte produces these haploid sperm by mitosis. The female gametophyte produces a female gamete, or egg, inside each of many female reproductive structures called archegonia. Like the sperm, the eggs are haploid and are produced by mitosis. The sexual reproduction of a moss requires water, which is one reason mosses are typically found in moist environments. Sperm cells require water for transport to egg cells. Once in the vicinity of an egg, a sperm cell swims to the egg and fertilizes the egg by fusing with it. The fusion produces a diploid zygote, the first cell of the next generation, called the sporophyte generation. The zygote divides by mitosis and grows into a multicellular sporophyte. During the life of the sporophyte, it remains attached to the gametophyte and depends on the gametophyte for water and nutrients. As the sporophyte continues to grow and elongate, the surrounding gametophyte tissue keeps pace, but eventually cracks at its middle. The remaining hood-like tissue at the tip, called the calyptra, protects the growing sporophyte. Underneath the calyptra grows a sporangium filled with thousands of spores. The spores are haploid and are produced when diploid cells of the sporophyte undergo meiosis. When the top of the sporangium is shed, it reveals a ring of teeth-like structures holding in the spores. These teeth are highly responsive to humidity. They arch in and then out again as they absorb water and then dry out. Each time the teeth open out, the spores are released to the wind. A spore that lands on moist ground will germinate, producing a filamentous elongating structure called a protonema. This protonema gives rise to buds, which in turn develop into the next haploid gametophyte generation. The gametophytes in this generation will mate and continue the alternation of generations.
Does that sort of help you guys understand it a little better? So they started in this case with the gametophyte, but actually, we, you know, in the picture that we were using, we started with the sporophyte. So they're starting with this one over here, right? So they're starting with like the female and the male gametophyte, which can be in the same plant, right? So the antheridium produces the sperm through mitosis because the gametophyte is already haploid, so we don't need to have the number of chromosomes, right? And then so sperm are formed, eggs are formed from the archegonium, and then they fertilize. And the thing that this picture doesn't show, but that the video said, was that the sporophyte actually develops from the gametophyte. So the gametophyte is like living down here, but then it has like a diploid, number of cells that are growing and growing, and then they form this sporophyte, right? And then the sporophyte's the one that this region of the sporophyte, the sporangium, that undergoes meiosis to produce those little spores, right? You don't need to know like the protonema, and you don't need to know like the like all those other words. Just like you have to be able to understand this main picture, right? So pretty much when is meiosis occurring? The only time meiosis is occurring is from the diploid sporophyte to produce the spores, right? But besides that, everything else is mitosis, right? And then the only time that chromosome numbers are really changing is from the sporophyte to the spores, which is that they're getting halved there, right? And then during fertilization, when the gametes come together, then they're restoring that diploid number there, right? And then that still undergoes mitosis to produce the diploid multicellular sporophyte, right? Is that pretty clear? Yeah? So here are just like the main things that I want you guys to know. So that whole alternation between like a multicellular gametophyte, then giving rise to the multicellular haploid gametophyte, then giving rise to the multicellular diploid sporophyte, and then going back to the multicellular haploid gametophyte, that's called the alternation of generations, right? And in plants. So basically, typically humans, not typically, but always, humans only have a multicellular diploid organism, right? We produce egg and sperm, but they don't actually then undergo mitosis to make like a multicellular like egg or a multicellular sperm, right? So that's why it's kind of weird for us to maybe visualize, but for plants, they have a multicellular diploid form and they have a multicellular haploid form, right? They produce the spores by meiosis, by the sporophyte, right? But then they produce the gametes, the spores, those spores then divide by mitosis to form the multicellular haploid gametophyte, which is a plant that's all made of haploid cells, right? And then this is the weird part. Like when we make our gametes, what process do we undergo? Meiosis, right? So we go from diploid to haploid to make the gametes. But in plants, there's that extra step. So they already have the haploid gametophyte that was produced from the spore undergoing mitosis. So now in order to form the gametes, they don't need to undergo meiosis. They need to just do mitosis from their haploid gametophyte, right? So that's like the main difference between human generations versus like plants generations, right? So you should know that the gametophyte is haploid, multicellular, and that the sporophyte is diploid, multicellular. And you should know that the sporophyte gives rise to the spores via meiosis, whereas the gametophyte gives rise to the gametes through mitosis because it is already haploid. Okay? Questions? No? Okay, I'll try to post that when I can, when it lets me. I don't know. I'll post this PowerPoint too. I hope it lets me post that too. But yeah, it's still doing that. But maybe I should close this whole thing out and then try to do it again. So I'm trying to do it from a file. See, I don't know what's wrong with this thing, but in any case, if worst comes to worst, I'll have to like email it to you guys. I'll take a screenshot of of the document or something, and then I'll email it to you guys or something like very low tech. But I hope that I'll be able to post it. But in any case, the plant worksheet will be due on Tuesday. Because on Monday we'll finish plants. And on Monday we only have a few more points to cover about plants. Originally, like if we were in school, we would like grind up spinach and like we'd be able to view chloroplasts like under the microscope, which would have been really nice. But obviously we can't do that. Next week I have to proctor these Rutgers tests. You guys aren't taking any, right? But I have to proctor these Rutgers tests for the juniors, and I think sophomores are taking it too. But I think that they'll end by time. I think they're only scheduled for like an hour, so like maybe it would run till like 10:30. So I don't anticipate any problems. I should be able to come back and we should be able to have class. If for some reason like there's some huge emergency, like last year there was a big problem, like they wouldn't, we couldn't get access to the Rutgers test or whatever, so we had to wait like for hours, and then like everything was delayed. So if something like that happens, then I might just have to post the PowerPoint for you guys to read and like do the worksheet on. But I hope that won't happen, but just be ready for that in case that might. All right, any questions, anyone? Let me just actually take attendance real quick just to make sure that everyone's here. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Perfect. You guys are all there. All right. So I'll post that, and then I'll post the PowerPoint right now before I forget as well. And if you guys want to go over your tests at any point, like see which ones you got wrong, please email me and let me know, and we'll schedule a time to go over those. All right? Good. All right. Have a good day, guys. See you tomorrow. No, I won't see you tomorrow. I'll see you on Monday. Have a good weekend, too.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend.